How many of you are planners, organizers? You work in the details. You like to see a plan come together, and you want to make sure it does, and so you care about those kinds of things. Do you want to just raise your hand right now, just around the room? You're just admitting it. You're into the details, which means everybody who just raised their hands thinks they're better than you. That's what that means. No, I'm just kidding. My wife doesn't really think she's better than me. In fact, we need you. We need you detailed, organized, planning types. We need that so much because even those of us who aren't like consumed with the nitty-gritty details, we do like it when a plan comes together. We do like it when it makes sense. We like it when life seems to have meaning and purpose and direction, and that steps are being taken to lead to an end goal. We all enjoy that. In fact, I think we all long for that. We desire that, which is probably why whenever you graduated high school, if it applies, or at least when you were at that age when you decided maybe you were going to go to college, or maybe you were going to start a career and you were just going to start working, and you at that age started thinking about, getting that girl and marrying that girl and landing that job and then beginning that journey of life together and getting that home, and then you wanted to travel together, and then maybe you wanted to start a family together and you wanted to have children, and you just knew that you would be a better parent than your parents because everybody thinks they're going to be a better parent than their parent, and then you had kids and you thought better. But, generally speaking, you wanted there to be a plan, and you wanted there to be direction and purpose and meaning in your life. I think, and that was even probably indicated because whenever it didn't happen, whenever something didn't go the way you had planned or the way you expected or the way that you thought, losing the job wasn't in your plan, and maybe that happened. Maybe for you, starting a family was, but you've not been able to have children. Maybe for you, it was, I didn't find the right person and I'm still looking for the right person. Maybe for you, the relationship falling apart certainly wasn't what you had in mind. The business failure wasn't what you expected. Your child's behavior or the choices that your kids are making, that's not how you thought it was going to go. And you just thought you'd be healthier than you are right now. You certainly didn't expect the illness that you got diagnosed with to come into your life, and that's affected a lot of things in your life. For you, the diagnosis wasn't what you planned on happening. God just hasn't moved in the way that you thought He was going to move. And whenever those things begin to happen in our lives and things aren't going the way we planned or thought they would go, we would respond with something. Maybe you responded by saying, everything happens for a reason. And why would you say that? Because you wanted there to be a reason. You wanted there to be an explanation, but maybe it didn't happen for the reason that you thought it happened. Or maybe you said something I guess it wasn't meant to be. It just wasn't meant to be. Well, who decided it wasn't meant to be? Was it God that decided that, or was it because of a choice you made or a decision that someone else made? What do you mean by it wasn't meant to be? Because you wanted there to be meaning in it. There's got to be a reason for this. There's got to be meaning in this. We long for that. We want to see something come together. We want everything in our lives to make sense, to have a clear explanation, to fit our goals and objectives. So what do you do when it doesn't? I think there's a great answer to that. And it's found in the Gospel of Luke, and we're going to be looking at that together today. In fact, if you have a Bible or a device, I'd like for you to open up to that, to Luke chapter 1, where Luke writes in his Gospel something that I think really helps people who experience that. And as we turn to that, I want to remind you, Luke also wrote the book of Acts. And when I look at Luke, I think what we're looking at is somebody who was into the details. Those of you who are organized and detail-oriented and you want things to be planned out, you would have loved Luke. Luke the physician, Luke the doctor. He was that kind of guy that wanted there to be an orderly, detailed account of everything that was going to happen, and he writes in that way. And I want us to look at this in Luke 1, verses 1 through 4, where Luke says, "Many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us. just as they were handed down to us by those who from the first were eyewitnesses and servants of the word. With this in mind, since I myself have carefully investigated from the beginning, I too decided to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, so that you may know the certainty of the things you have been taught. Orderly, account, investigated, eyewitness. You can kind of hear the tone of Luke's voice even as he writes this. I can picture him dictating it and saying, most excellent Theophilus, I'm providing a historical, accurate account, detailed in every way. And all you detailed people would have said, yes, yes, give me more. That's Luke. And what I want to do for just a moment is, before we get into the birth narrative on this Christmas Sunday, I think I just want to remind us that Luke is writing from a historical perspective. This is not a fairy tale once upon a time. This is someone who's investigated, talked to the eyewitnesses. He likely could have talked to Mary and got a firsthand account as she's being cared for by the disciple John. And Luke could have gotten that account as he's writing in the first century. In other words, the eyewitnesses are alive. And if what Luke is writing is not an accurate birth narrative, they would have said, dude, that's not how it happened. But he says the eyewitnesses were there and he was investigating and he's looking into it. And I just want to give you some examples that Luke is orderly and historical and accurate. And the two examples I want to give you actually come from the book of Acts, but it's one example, a couple examples of many. But when Luke is writing the book of Acts, one example is in Acts chapter 19, verse 31. Luke is mentioning the officials that were in the city of Ephesus, and he gives them the name Asiarchs. Archs meaning leaders. They were the Asiarchs of the city. And what's interesting about that is Luke says he's writing during the first century. He's investigating and talking to the eyewitnesses. And Sir William Ramsay, who was an archaeologist that lived from 1851 to 1939, he was skeptical. He was skeptical of Luke, he was skeptical of the Bible, and he looked for opportunities as Luke talked about what was happening in ancient history to discredit him. And so Sir William Ramsay, when he read Luke's account of the Asiarchs in Ephesus, he said that we all know that in the first century they didn't go by that title. There were no Asiarchs in Ephesus at that time. Luke is wrong. Until later, when Sir William Ramsay discovered these documents and other writings that in fact talked about the Asiarchs that were there in the first century during the time of Luke. And he said, And then in Acts 17, verse 6, whenever Luke talked about the Polytarch in Thessalonica, that was particularly striking to Sir William Ramsay because that term was unknown in Greek literature outside of the book of Acts. Sounds like Luke was maybe making something up. But Sir William Ramsay discovered in some archaeological digs 5 inscriptions with the term Polytarch in the city of Thessalonica that Luke was referring to. And Sir William Ramsay, who was skeptical, came to this conclusion: every time Luke conflicts with our knowledge of ancient history, Luke is right. He went from skeptic to a believer in Luke as a historical, accurate figure. Now, why does that help us right here in 2019 during this Christmas season? Because Luke tells us in verse 4, the reason he's writing this is so that you may know the certainty of the things you've been taught. That this is real historical events. Don't you appreciate people who are into the details? Don't you appreciate people who investigate carefully like Luke, so you know that what you're reading not only is accurate, but Luke says, I want to give you an orderly account. This is going to be an orderly account. Well, we appreciate that, Luke. Maybe it reveals a little bit of your personality, but I also would have to say this: the events that he's talking about are anything but orderly as we get into them. And so I just want to read this together. Let's read the Christmas story when things just don't go the way that you anticipate. Like in Luke 1, verse 26, where it begins, in the 6th month of Elizabeth's pregnancy, God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth, a town in Galilee. Elizabeth is in a high-risk pregnancy. She's old and she's been barren, unable to have children. And God sends an angel, Gabriel, to Nazareth. Nazareth is a town of about 10 acres. That means it's 1/4 of the size of the north side property. You're talking about 50 to 100 people in this podunk town of Nazareth, which for some period of time, people said didn't exist in the first century. One more example of how the Bible is not accurate until in archaeological digs they discovered, especially through the work of Dr. Ken Dark, homes that dated to the very first century, like this one here is a picture of a first century home in Nazareth. Maybe this is the home of Mary. We don't know. Maybe this is where the angel came. But the angel came to Nazareth, a town in Galilee, and then we read this, to a virgin pledged to be married to a man named Joseph, a descendant of David. The virgin's name was Mary. We don't know a lot about Mary. Most of what we know about her is in Luke chapter 1 and 2 and Matthew chapter 2, but what we know is significant. The angel went to her and said, "Greetings, you who are highly favored. The Lord is with you." Mary was greatly troubled at his words and wondered what kind of greeting this might be, because when angels would show up, typically it was to bring judgment, not to bring great news. She was concerned, she was worried. But the angel said to her, "Do not be afraid, Mary. You have found favor with God. You will conceive and give birth to a son, and you're to call him Jesus. He will be great. He'll be called the Son of the Most High. The Lord God will give him the throne of his father David, and he will reign over Jacob's descendants forever. His kingdom will never end." "How will this be?" Mary asked the angel, "since I'm a virgin?" And the angel answered, "The Holy Spirit will come on you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. So the Holy One to be born will be called the Son of God. Even Elizabeth, your relative, is going to have a child in her old age, and she who was said to be unable to conceive is in her 6th month. For no word from God will ever fail." "I am the Lord's servant," Mary answered. "May your word to me be fulfilled." And then the angel left her. Talk about a change of plans. I know that Mary gives in her song glory to God and talks about the humble state of her and how God has elevated her to be a blessing. But I want to look at the other side of that we know for a fact that things didn't go at all the way Mary imagined or planned, and probably even in that moment what she anticipated would come in the future. Her journey was a difficult one. Mary thought she was just planning a wedding in Nazareth. That wedding wouldn't happen the way she was planning it. Mary thought she would live with Joseph's family when they got married, and that wouldn't come to fruition either. Not like that. Mary thought that her first child would be Joseph's child, maybe a son that would look like his daddy. But that's not how that was going to play out in her life. The old angel shows up and says, "Change of plans. You're going to carry the Messiah, God in the flesh, in your own womb. You, a virgin, will be with child." And her plans changed. I want to talk about this for a moment. First of all, Mary had a suspicious pregnancy. Here we have a pregnant teenage girl. They would get married at a young age, 14, 15 years of age, and this is a highly suspicious pregnancy. There is not a credible explanation for it, certainly not the one that she's giving. We know that for a fact, especially in a culture that values sexual purity. And we know it's not being taken well because she tries to explain it to Joseph, and Joseph has in mind to divorce her quietly. That's his plans until an angel shows up and convinces him otherwise. That conversation was not going to go well. She's trying to convince her mom, her best friend, and probably her math teacher, who's telling her this isn't adding up. And she's probably thinking, "Gabriel, would you just come to my math teacher and tell her why this is happening?" Because no one is believing her. This appears to be an illegitimate pregnancy, something that actually the religious leaders would use against Jesus years later. They would call him such. Mary's trying to explain something that's so hard to explain. She's in a difficult position. It's hard being in her position. It reminds me of what Jeremy Bassett from Oklahoma shared whenever he was going to his niece's kindergarten Christmas play. And it was the kindergartner's first play ever, and it was a Christmas play, and his niece's best friend, her name was Claire. And Claire was Mary in the play. And while they were backstage getting ready for the Christmas play, all these kindergartners are getting dressed, and the parents are all around the room helping them get ready and change. One little boy was walking around the room and so excited. He was already in costume. And he would walk up to the different kids and say, "I'm a sheep. What are you?" And someone politely say, I'm an angel, or I'm a shepherd. "I'm a sheep. What are you?" Well, he walked up to Claire and he said, "I'm a sheep. What are you?" And Claire said, "I'm Mary." And he realized in that moment he was talking to like one of the leads in the play. I mean, she had a poor, and so he just looked at her and he said, "Well, it's hard being a sheep, you know." And Claire replied to him, "Well, it's also hard being a virgin." Yes, it is, Claire. Thank you for that clarity. It is hard being a virgin, especially a virgin who's expecting a baby, especially a virgin with child. And this is Mary's position. She's with child. And I know that Jesus could not have come if his father was an earthly father. Otherwise, he wouldn't be God in the flesh. But what a strange way to come. Mary has a suspicious pregnancy. And then we know this, Mary made a difficult journey. She travels over 90 miles. This is like from here past Joplin, Missouri, not on a straight I-44 roadway, but she's making this journey from Nazareth all the way to Bethlehem while she's 9 months pregnant. No doctor is going to recommend that journey for someone in their 9th month of pregnancy. But this census that Caesar declared is not timely, not for her at all. And then when they get to that community of Bethlehem, there's no guest room for them. And so they're staying in primitive quarters where there she goes into labor. And you can imagine the fear and how scary that would be for a young teenage girl giving birth, her firstborn, wrapping him in swaddling clothes, placing him in a manger. I mean, imagine that. The city of Springfield would not even issue her a driver's license yet at this age. We wouldn't entrust a car to her, but she's being entrusted with the Savior of the world. Some parents would be like, "I'm not sure we want you carrying a cell phone," but she's carrying Emmanuel. She's carrying God with us, and then giving birth to Jesus after this difficult journey in her life. That's not how the plan was supposed to go. That's not what she was envisioning in her mind. And then she became a refugee. That wasn't in her plans at all. She never dreamed of that. I mean, Nazareth, you grow up there, you stay there. It's a community, you know everybody in the community. But after she gives birth to Jesus, King Herod, a paranoid king who had already killed many people in his family, including his own children who were a threat to his throne, hears that the King of the Jews is being born in Bethlehem. He's making a careful search for that child because he sends his soldiers there to kill every baby 2 years of age and younger. And Mary and Joseph flee as refugees into Egypt, a land that the Israelites had come out of, and now they're running there, running for their lives as refugees into a foreign land. And you can imagine the fear, the anxiety, the uncertainty, what this means for them. It's exactly what people were feeling like when our missions team in October went to Mexico with Crossroads Missions to serve there like they have many years in the past. But this time, they found that they were serving alongside with and to a number of Venezuelans who are in Mexico because they're refugees there, fleeing a socialist country with atrocities being committed by the government, with things being taken away from them, and they're fleeing. Many of these that they were interacting with were very highly educated people, doctors, physicians, who had practices in their own country, who were forced to flee for their lives. And here our team is ministering and serving them. They now have nothing, hoping for asylum, scared for their lives, the gang activities and things that are in that region of the world that they have to go to. And so you can just imagine when you look at the anxiety and fears that they're dealing with that our team ministered to, what it was like for Mary and for Joseph to be refugees in a foreign land. That wasn't part of the plan. And then Mary became a widow. That didn't meet her dreams. Those of you who have lost a spouse, you know her loss. You know exactly how she felt. We don't know when she becomes a widow. We just know that during Jesus' ministry, she and her children, she and Joseph had other children, are interacting with Jesus, but Joseph's nowhere to be found. He's never mentioned again in those latter years. In fact, when Jesus is hanging on the cross, he tells John to take care of Mary. He entrusts Mary into his care. Because Joseph isn't alive, she's a widow dealing with loss and pain. And maybe the only thing that is causing her more pain than the loss of her husband is going to be the loss of her son. When Jesus was 40 days old, Mary and Joseph took him to the temple to dedicate him to the Lord as the law required. While they're there, a righteous man named Simeon, who had been promised that he would see the Messiah before he died, sees the Messiah, sees Jesus. And taking Jesus, here's what Simeon says to Mary, the mother of Jesus. He says, "This child is destined to cause the falling and rising of many in Israel." Why? Because those who refuse to believe in him, who reject him, are going to fall. Those who put their trust in him will rise. And to be a sign that will be spoken against, so that the thoughts of many hearts will be revealed. And a sword, Mary, will pierce your own soul too. Biblical scholars believe that when Simeon gave that prophecy to Mary, he was talking about the moment when she would be watching her own son being crucified on a cross. Romans who were experts in crucifixion, experts in inflicting pain, would be piercing Jesus to a cross, and that a sword would pierce her soul too. The word for sword is a long, broad sword, the kind that inflicts deep cut, deep wound, deep pain. And Simeon says, Mary, you're going to experience that. That's not what she was anticipating. That's not what she was hoping for. That's not the direction that she thought this was going to go. She didn't know that her own soul would be pierced. That's not what she had in mind. Not when the angel said to her that she was highly favored. I mean, you can imagine in that moment that Mary would have had a few questions. This would have been a confusing time for her and chaotic when she's watching her son being crucified on a cross to say, God, how is this the plan? How does this fit into an orderly account? How is this an example of organization and planning and a plan being worked out? It didn't feel like that at all to her. And how is this something that a person that the angel said to me, I'm highly favored? Is this what someone who's highly favored experiences? Being a widow, being a refugee, being on difficult journeys in life, having your own soul pierced? Is this what, when you're highly favored by God, is this what it looks like? Highly favored means the one God delights in. So if God delights in you, is this what you can expect? Is this how it's going to go? I mean, how do you respond to that? What do you do when your plans are falling apart and things aren't coming together? How are you supposed to respond to that? Well, I would tell you to respond exactly the way Mary did. And her response is right here in Luke 1:38. I am the Lord's servant, Mary answered. May your word to me be fulfilled. What do you do whenever plans are falling apart and you don't understand what God is doing? You just say, I'm your servant, and I'm trusting your word. This is what we say. When your plan is a mess, you should trust God's plan to work for the good by simply saying, I'm your servant, and I'm trusting your word. If I could you just say that out loud with me, that phrase, I'm your servant and I'm trusting your word. Say that with me. I'm your servant and I'm trusting your word. Do it again. I'm your servant and I'm trusting your word. That is the appropriate response. When you don't understand what's happening in your life, why it's happening, what God is up to. Because the angel said to Mary, no word from God will fail. No word from God will fail. This may appear to be a disorganized mess, but this is the brilliant plan of God. Over 2,000 years later, people will still be talking about this and celebrating this all around the world. The birth of a baby. I mean, we can't understand all the implications of that. Why would God do that? I don't know, but because He can. Only Jesus could fulfill the Old Testament prophecy He fulfilled. Only Jesus could come in the way He came and change the world. Only God can do that. And that's what the Christmas story reveals to us, that even when our life is a mess, even when your plans are a mess, even when your family is a mess, I'm your servant and I'm trusting your plan. Even when you're a refugee, even when you're a virgin and pregnant, it doesn't even make sense. I'm your servant, and I'm trusting your plan. Only God can do that. Only Jesus did do that. In fact, 25 years after Jesus died, the Apostle Paul, with the advantage of hindsight, looking back, wrote a letter to Christians, and here's what he said in Ephesians 1:11. He said, in Him, in God, we were also chosen, having been predestined according to the plan of Him, who works out everything in conformity with the purpose of His will. God is working out everything in conformity with the purpose of His will. No matter what craziness is around us, God can carry out in His sovereign plan the purpose that He wants to bring. You can trust that. Christmas reveals it. I mean, when life can be so random, the good news is regardless of what's happening, God is working for good. Look at, maybe you know this text in Romans 8:28. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who've been called according to His purpose. Romans 8:28. Now, it's not saying that all things will be good and pleasant. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say that God works all things together for good immediately. No, it doesn't say that. It doesn't say that God works out all things together for everybody. No, it's for those who've been called by God and who love Him. Those of you believers, those of you Christians who are saying, I'm your servant and I'm trusting in your word. Those of us who are called according to His purpose and who love Him. God is working for the good in all things. He will bring good even out or through those situations we don't see any good. We have to trust Him in that. In fact, the verb tense, God works for the good. That verb tense is a continuing activity. So He works for the good and He continues to work for the good, even when it doesn't seem like He's working, even when you can't see Him working, even you don't understand what He's doing. He continues to work out the good for the good in your life, even when your plans are a mess. We just simply say, I'm your servant, God, and I'm trusting your word. I'm your servant, and I'm trusting your word. That's the response at Christmas. When plans aren't going the way you thought they would go. Think of this text from Isaiah 55. For my thoughts are not your thoughts. Neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. God, in His sovereign plan, is working all things together for the good for those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. God is not slow in keeping His promise. He's at work, and you can trust Him. And when your plan's not coming together, you just need to know this. You just need to respond like Mary responded. I'm your servant. I'm trusting your word. I'm your servant, and I'm trusting your word. Didn't Jesus have that same response? When Jesus is in a garden about to go to the cross, I'm your servant, and I'm trusting your word. A word that says, I would not abandon you to the grave. I won't let you see decay there. I'm going to raise you to life. In fact, I want to point out something just really quick in Luke 2:35. Because we looked at this earlier, Simeon said this to Mary while holding a baby. I want you to keep that picture in mind as we read this again. He's speaking to Mary while holding a baby. And a sword will pierce your own soul too. Also. Now wait, who's he talking about? We know he's talking to Mary. Surely he doesn't mean the baby. Surely he doesn't mean that there's going to be a piercing of this baby. No, that's exactly what he means. Jesus would be pierced for our transgressions. He would be crushed for our iniquities. He would take the punishment on himself that was due us. And by his wounds, by his stripes, we're healed. And there Mary watched as her son, her firstborn son, was crucified. Her own soul was pierced to its very depth as he made payment for the sins of the world. I want that picture to be in your mind, that even as we sing about a birth, we're thinking about a cross. In fact, if you would stand to your feet, and I'd like for our servers to be dismissed for a time of communion that's coming, where we eat of bread that represents the body of Jesus, and we drink of juice representing the blood of Jesus to remember the cross. If you're not yet a follower of Jesus, a believer of Jesus, it is okay to let these trays pass. No one's going to think less of you in that journey. But may all of us right now keep in our mind's eye not just a manger, but let's keep in our eye the cross of Jesus as we sing.